You've discovered the Technoprogressive Hub. Join us to fight for a high-tech and radically democratic future. Today on Technoprogressive Hub, we're speaking with Aleksandra Przegalińska, a philosopher and social scientist of AI. Dr. Przegalińska is Vice Rector and head of the Human-Machine Interaction Research Center at Kozminski University in Poland. She is currently a senior research associate at the Center for Labor and the Economy at Harvard University. She works on the future of work, humanoid and social robots, and wearable technologies, and is co-author of the book Collaborative Society and of Debating Universal Basic Income. Welcome, Aleksandra. And we are old acquaintances, so it's very nice to reconnect.
Yes, absolutely. Very nice to reconnect, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
I wanted to go back to your original interests in virtual social interaction. I remember playing around in Second Life. Did we ever have a meeting in Second Life or something like that? We might have back in the day. And then Second Life just kind of dissipated. My colleagues and I, when Mark Zuckerberg was promoting the metaverse a couple of years ago, we decided to write a white paper on what it would mean to democratize the metaverse. And of course, by the time the paper was out, the metaverse was dead in the water again. So is the metaverse dead? I continue to believe that there's going to be augmented reality that will work and that people will want, and that will have these kinds of effects, but it's just not here yet.
Well, I think that some versions of metaverse are definitely out there. When you look at the children, young people as they interact via Minecraft or Roblox, they're certainly very familiar with all of these environments. They build things inside these environments and they consider them important. They spend a lot of time in that version of reality, I would say. And I think, with the Second Life, it's kind of an interesting thing because it was a very robust experiment, I would say, and extremely immersive. And I think it got replaced by social media that were somewhat immersive, but not as much. And they did not require, you to disconnect from other parts of your life. With Second Life, my experience was that you really had to abandon quite a lot to be there. Because I've spent 2 years of my life there. We did a project funded by the NSF at that time about virtual communities and how they work in Second Life. And I just remember spending hours and hours there, being completely disconnected from other parts of my life. And then I kind of understand that when social media arrived, they allowed you to be virtually engaged with other people and pursue various activities online, but not in such an immersive way. And I think people just switched to something that was a bit less cumbersome for them. And I don't even talk about that. Yeah.
Asynchronous communication always has an advantage over having to be at the same time and place with somebody.
Yes. And I think it was really, a big deal, I think, to build your avatar, to show yourself out there, to also be judged by other people. It's a big effort and it's a bit easier to hide. And like you said, social media, I think, allow you to be out there, but also be hidden to some extent. And a synchronous part is important here. But I would say that, particularly observing my daughter and her generation, she's 13. As I said at the beginning, those kids are ready for some version of the metaverse because they are building things in various games and they consider that relevant. They consider that a relevant part of their experience and what they've done, their achievements as well. I would say that the constant problem is probably human physiology and the fact that most of these systems are very wobbly, and interacting with them, if you really think about full immersion and being out there in a virtual space, all the delays, all the issues with your perception and how it's misaligned in that virtual world, this is usually quite a disadvantage. But probably to some extent, that can be removed or erased in the future. So I would say that we're still getting ready for the metaverse, and various forms, limited forms of the metaverse are out there. But the full one certainly has not arrived, and I think maybe Mark Zuckerberg is very unhappy about it. But I would bet that he thought that COVID was the right moment to try and launch something like that. But still, I would say people apparently wanted to come back to real life after COVID. They did not want to spend more time in that virtual environment, and the technological limitations also played a big role there.
I have to say, as a techno-progressive, I feel like I'm standing in the middle of a flooding stream that's all moving the other direction, just trying to stay in one place in regards to social media and its effects. You know, that I think that there's substantial evidence that there can be beneficial effects of social media. But almost all of the social policy and political efforts and think tank, interest is that the negative effects of social media, especially for kids. So it's really hard to make any kind of positive argument. In collaborative society, you were relatively positive about the generative collaborative effects that information and communication technologies were going to have, that the more we could connect, the more collaboration there would be. Are you still feeling that kind of optimism?
Well, it's an interesting question, because my co-author Dariusz, with whom I wrote the book, comes from the Wikipedia ecosystem. He was an editor of the Wikipedia for many years. He was on the board of Wikimedia Foundation. He was extremely involved in, that collaborative knowledge production that happens at Wikipedia. And I think, his enthusiasm is sort of confirmed by Wikipedia's success. Although obviously we could now talk a lot about what's happening with Wikipedia because of AI, etc. But nonetheless, it's a successful story. On the other hand, we have to be sort of frank here and very candid and simply say that it's one of those rare stories where things actually worked out really well. It's a voluntary effort, and it's a noble effort, I think, in many ways. Whereas there are other online communities that are certainly not as noble and certainly, may have very negative effects. In fact, I'm currently on something that's called the Council of the Future under the Polish Prime Minister. We're trying to advise the Prime Minister various policies related to innovations. The idea there is that Poland probably has somehow reached a level where it has to switch to new engines of growth, because we've been relying on certain old engines of growth for quite a while. They got us far to G20, in fact, as Poland is now quite a successful economy and a very strong one, but they will not take us further into the future. We have to be more innovative, and sort of, we at the beginning thought that we would mostly advise on how to build more resilient AI infrastructure in Europe and Poland. But actually the Prime Minister said to us, well, you know what, to me, an important topic right now is the social media, because all of us are observing the debates in Australia, new policies in many other countries that are preventing young people from joining social media too early. And he told us that he also expects us to actually work on that, which is not maybe, what we embarked on, but something that I think is a necessity to think about, what could we do so that virtual interactions of kids are not completely removed. They're out there, but they're healthy. And I think it's a very, very big question mark for us how to do it right. But I would say that we're in an interesting moment, because on the one hand, you could certainly say that we shouldn't be as optimistic as we were in that book with Dariusz in Collaborative Society. But then, even when it comes to AI, I've been observing recently a big wave or an uptake of open source models, which is close to what Dariusz and I would envisage as a better modality of working together in those virtual environments and building together. I know that in the US, the most popular models are obviously the commercial ones, subscription-based. But nonetheless, in Europe, the landscape is somewhat different. And in many different parts of the world, you have open source models that are just simply released and they're fully open source, not just semi-open source, but they're really out there with, open parameters, open weights, open information regarding the training and the data that has been used. And these sorts of models, even though they're smaller and maybe not as attractive to use, not as easy to use as some of the commercial models, are, I think, the future of AI. So open source artificial intelligence is that new wave of, I think, open source thinking that was there 20 years ago when, we all spoke about the global village and how we're going to contribute to the internet. And then, unfortunately, that did not work out. And we spoke about it a bit in the book, how, the sharing economy is a different thing when it's, about Wikipedia, and very different when it's Uber that claims that it's part of the sharing economy. So that whole, concept got distorted. But I think the rise of open source artificial intelligence is an interesting thing. And for me, a source of hope that this good, positive, collaborative, transparent direction still can be taken, and that maybe we'll find many enthusiasts of that approach among, our audiences and people who want to use AI for beneficial causes, for, various efforts. Yeah.
Poland's on the front line of the algorithmic war of propaganda between Russia, using the far right in Europe to attack democracy, now joined by the US State Department and X and Twitter. And there's been some discussion of the creation of a European social media platform.
Yeah.
Are you interested in that? I would join it in a minute.
So actually, for us at this Council of the Future, a very interesting referential case of, let's say, a take on technological sovereignty is definitely France, because France is pushing really hard. First of all, they're very smart in attracting global talent. Now, in times of turmoil, particularly in the American academia, many people are trying to find a place where their future career would be a bit more stable, and the funding would be secured and not uncertain. And I think France has made a lot of efforts to build a strong scientific community by attracting that global talent, but they've also done a couple of other interesting things. So one of them is investment in their own open source model, Mistral, which I think is the biggest competitor to commercial models that we have in Europe. So it's a very decent model. It's quite interesting for me that French companies really feel obliged to use it. I have worked and consulted for many French companies, and what I see is that they really take it very seriously, that they should be using their own architecture. And similarly, what you mentioned, they're trying to switch to their own Zoom or their own, Teams. So their own setup for virtual meetings. And I think this is already a very consistent policy of building technological sovereignty that is based on different rules, very often based on open source as well. But also, I think to some extent, backed by the thinking that we cannot be certain about the future of the transatlantic alliance, which is very sad for me as a person who's lived in the US and in Europe for so many years. But we see it unfolding, and I think many other European countries are really thinking seriously about it, that they have to have a plan B, that they cannot simply rely on American big tech. And, we could talk about, that reliance, from so many different viewpoints. It's a big, I think, question mark whether that's been sustainable and healthy for Europe. But either way, I think particularly now, it's just important to try and build something by ourselves, even if it's wobbly, even if it's not the best, because that's the truth. It's not going to be as good of a product as what American big tech is offering to us. It's clear. I do remember that a couple of years ago, even in Poland, we had a discussion about our own cloud, which ended up being Microsoft Cloud. Frankly speaking, was just called the Polish cloud, but it was in fact the Microsoft. But at that time, when it was not certain who would actually become that cloud or which provider, there was a real conversation, a very serious one, about the fact that we should try and build it from scratch. And now this debate is really coming back because of the geopolitical situation. So I'd say that you see Europe bracing itself for times of turmoil and trying to be as sovereign in the technology space as it can after many years of sleepiness and, just not paying attention to that over-reliance. I think now Europe is trying to wake up and allocate some funds to build wobbly but own, tech systems, including perhaps to some extent social media and AI as well.
Defense as well.
For
Poland's
sure.
on the front lines of helping Europe build up its defense capability.
Yes, absolutely. We discuss a lot. So at the council, we also talk a lot about dual-use technologies. This is a big thing in Poland. Frankly speaking, in all the countries that are frontier countries, we obviously have this traumatic, awful war that's happening. The Baltics are equally afraid. We see what's happening in the Ukraine, but we also are impressed by how Ukraine has built its, cybersecurity and military capabilities, including those that involve technologies like
drones,
AI. Yeah. So for us, they are in many ways an inspiration that it can be done fast if you're determined and if you allocate enough funds, you can really achieve quite a lot. So in that way, I think all the frontier countries are trying to spend as much as they can on dual-use technology, also with the hope that, what is or can be successful in the military could also have potentially very interesting applications for the larger society, including for the public administration, civic services, and stuff like that. So I think that this is definitely the part where we will see more and more investments, particularly in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe.
I just saw this morning a report from China that some Chinese officials are preparing for an era in which entrepreneurship in China is one person plus AI. That they will be able to start their own firms. And you've written about this in terms of one-person unicorns. And so it seems like you were ahead of, as a good futurist, you were at least a couple of years ahead of reality as it's coming. But I don't see this as a very optimistic innovation. I think it probably is already happening and can happen. There's just a story in Wired about AI-based firm that made billions of dollars. It turns out when you dig into the details, it was all by doing criminally or marginally criminal things, just to sell drugs that they shouldn't be selling and so forth. But I'm sure that legitimate firms can come out of this kind of innovation. But doesn't this just mean a future with more unemployment for the masses and a couple more oligarchs at the top?
Yeah, that threat is definitely there. Well, I think that there are two things here that should be somehow dissected or separated. One is the modality of working, right? So it's clear for many of us that we're going to work differently than we do right now because of artificial intelligence. And in many cases, it's already happening, right? So you have all the people working in IT who are currently vibe coding at least parts of their solutions. They're more so architects of AI than themselves, those who are programming or like writing the code from scratch. So they're sort of supervising one or many AIs and, making decisions, intentional decisions about where that software should be, deployed or how it should be designed, etc. So that is something that's happening. And similarly, in research work, I can only say that, I've been doing a lot of different analyses my team and we've been working a lot on sentiment analysis. Let's say we were doing a lot of analysis of human AI interaction. And we just have a new tool, which is the LLM, frankly speaking, that does it for us extremely fast and well. And it's a very granular analysis. We've never had algorithms like that with which we could do such a good topical analysis. And that for me is only, just simply a confirmation of the fact that we're going to work with AI. The question is, however, what will those modalities translate to? Because what I wrote in that book that you mentioned, Converging Minds, together with my co-author Tamila, is that there are many ways in which you can work with AI. You can have a more synergetic, if you will, effect of working with AI as a teammate. You can have AI do things on parallel with you, but separately. You can have AI as your critic, even to some extent, or your coach. So there are many roles for this technology, but ultimately our approach was consistently human-centric, in the sense that our idea was that there's human not only in the loop, but actually at the center, supervising all that work, and also, creating hybrid teams with other humans and with their AIs, and effectively collaborating on various projects. And that, I think, is okay. I think this is probably something that we will see and we can expect in many different professions, particularly in knowledge work. But what you said is, I think, equally important, namely that this modality can really amplify our work and can be very helpful, but there is a threat to it that someone will just take it way too far. And what we're seeing right now, and this is something that makes me really unhappy, is that various big tech companies, including Anthropic, which always claims to have that moral compass that the other tech players don't have, that they're clearly stating, okay, knowledge will be automated. It's not just about amplifying your work as a knowledge worker or whatever worker and helping you out in doing things better. It's actually about simply replacing you. And that is something we've never advocated for. And this is, I think, extremely threatening from all different perspectives, because there's one thing that is related to responsibility for your work, compliance issues, where humans do take responsibility for their work. That's how we constructed this whole social system, and economic system that we're in. The other thing is, negative effects of over-relying on AI, where it's still not such a stable technology, with tendencies to hallucinate, and sometimes with quite generic effects. So we've seen that as well, right? So we saw lots of experiments where when human work is amplified by AI, you can expect interesting results, but when people over-delegate things to AI, the results are not so good. So there is that.
Offloading.
And then, right, and brain fry and all of these other things that, are new phenomena that we have to analyze. But then the third thing is really the impact on the job market. And this is the one that's extremely concerning for me, because I would absolutely advocate for not being a Luddite and not saying, hey, just let's try to get rid of AI because it's such a threat to the job market. But on the other hand, when I hear all these things that, big tech is very boldly stating that soon enough, 30-50% of knowledge work will be replaced completely, right? No work for white collar workers at all in the next 5 years or so. This is very threatening. This is not a good direction. And I think my hope is that, this human unicorn is not a pathway to something like that, because if that's the case, then we are all in trouble. And frankly speaking, I think the US is really in trouble, even more so than other countries, because here you have a market that's very reliant on internal consumption. So you need to have people who have jobs and have a purchasing power to stimulate that economy. And if all of these people are jobless, what's going to happen? You are not a country that's exporting resources. You're also not a regulated country that would take a certain stance or approach towards this technology that impacts the job market. So it looks like in a situation with an impoverished middle class and also unregulated job market when it comes to AI and automation, this is a very threatening situation.
Well, we're going to get, I will get to, if we have time, technological unemployment and universal basic income. But I wanted to touch on your paper, In Bot We Trust, or In Bots We Trust, because you were thinking before we actually had these LLMs, you were thinking about how we track interactions with social robots and what kind of performance measurement we should have of that. And that's an extremely timely topic right now, because we're all talking about AI psychosis and AI girlfriends and boyfriends, and do we want kids, forming companionship with these things? Where are you now? What kinds of regulatory interventions or performance metrics do you propose now?
Well, I remember that in that paper, we were sort of interested in two things. One, which I think is still very relevant, is that your personality will really heavily impact your trajectory of interacting with AI, because what I think is very often omitted and should be a part of this human-centric approach to artificial intelligence, is to put humans in the center also as individuals. They all have different ways of interacting with AI, different ways of working, different gifts, talents, whatever. And there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach.
One of the problems,
this is
one of the problems in a lot of the debate is that
Yeah, go
people don't acknowledge that, as with anything like exercise or dieting or anything, there's a minority who are going to have a toxic approach
Yeah.
to that thing. And if
Yeah.
the majority of us are finding eudaimonic benefit from interacting with social bots, but only a small minority are having these toxic effects, then it's just like everything else.
Well, I would say that many of us actually do experience toxic effects. So many of us probably are enhanced, let's say, in one way or another by AI and see its benefits, for instance, in our work environments. But I feel like this whole design of extremely sycophantic assistive artificial intelligence, even if it seems extremely beneficial to us because we're getting so many compliments from AI, I think your typical interaction with ChatGPT is usually about how you or I or anybody who uses it is really so brilliant, right? And it's that level of sycophantism, I think, is something we've never experienced before.
Claude,
And so
I use Claude,
Yeah.
when I ask it, like, how do I fix this thing on my computer? It says, here's how you fix it. And the techno-progressive reason why that thing isn't fixed yet is this. And so it's like constantly fluffing up my ideological priors.
Right, which can be dangerous too, right? Because it's kind of solidifying certain ideas and not opening you up to others. So I find that to be problematic. And I have to tell you that, so what I said is that we definitely need a technology that's flexible and suitable to our goals. But I think it's been pushed a bit too far in that direction. So to the extent of what we're experiencing right now, where it's so sycophantic that it's actually really hard to have a meaningful conversation with it, where you wouldn't be suspicious about, whether it gives you that answer just because you would like it, or is it really a good answer to your question? And I think in that way, it cannot be compared. I don't like the word AI friends. AI companions is maybe a bit better, but AI friends to me is like some sort of weird paradoxical thing, because how can it be your friend if it's just so sycophantic and assistive at the same time? Your friends are not like that for you. They're supposed to tell you when you're doing something wrong that you actually did something wrong, and that's the honesty you would appreciate, not clapping for everything you've just done. And I think particularly you mentioned regulations and you asked about them. I would say this is, for me, it's very problematic, particularly when it comes to minors. As I hear and as I'm reading, many young people in the US and also in Europe interact with AI on a daily basis, and many of them also have those AI companions that are going to play a very big role in their formative years, which I think is a problem, because if you build your relationship with AI on the principles of you being the dominant power and AI being your assistant, how are you going to develop healthy relationships with other people who are your peers and your equals, and how are you going to learn about their boundaries, and how are you going to learn about your own boundaries, and what you like, what they like, and how to face a conflict or some sort of resistance. So I think in that respect, again, the US has not done a lot to protect minors. And by the way, we mentioned at the beginning, social media, I kind of have that hunch or like intuition, and I shared it also with the Polish Prime Minister, that you cannot just simply regulate social media today when it comes to minors or teenagers. You really have to involve regulating AI as well, because if those kids are not talking to each other on social media, they will likely talk to bots or different AI assistants. Which is already happening either way. So if you don't include that, you might end up in a situation where you have not really solved the problem at all, right? So minors and those vulnerable groups, I think, are very important for me when it comes to regulating AI. And beyond that, I'm kind of very concerned about, for instance, statements like the one by Sam Altman that he's going to now roll out erotica version of ChatGPT, and their age verification system is probabilistic. When I hear something like that, to me, this is almost outlandish, right? How can that even be the case that you would consider such a service? We didn't talk about Grok and nudifying humans, yet another, extremely problematic case. But how can you even consider such a modality when you don't really know who's interacting with your AI system and you cannot state it for sure?
Every year, Spotify tells you a number of things about your music listening habits, including your estimated age based on your music listening habits. And my estimated age this year was 26, apparently, because I was listening to so much K-pop Demon Hunter. And my daughter was guessed at 56 because she was listening to something much older. So, I'm not too confident with probabilistic age verification.
Yeah.
I was just at a conference in New Hampshire on AI and philosophy, and my colleague and I, Nir, we have written a white paper together a couple years ago about automating therapy, and we have a chapter on that in our forthcoming book. And so we were asked to debate this before a live studio audience, and it was a lot of fun. But it does, as with defending social media or defending companion bots, it does feel a little bit like swimming against the tide to be defending therapy bots. But I did make a number of arguments in their defense. Access for a well-regulated therapy bot, that is not for using a general purpose LLM for this purpose, but for, and there are a number of these now, bots that are to walk people through cognitive behavioral therapy, or that, or try to detect suicidal ideation, depressive symptoms, and so forth. How do you feel about therapy bots? You've written about that topic also.
Well, we've covered it to some extent, and it's kind of interesting because the very roots of AI companions and chatbots are actually in therapy, right? The first bot, Eliza, yes, was a Rogerian therapist, if I'm not mistaken, and did quite a good job, which was interesting because Weizenbaum, so the guy who built it, the engineer behind it, his assumption was that it would not work. And he got depressed because of this whole experiment, as I remember, because it turned out that people actually wanted to interact with the bot a bit more. But, I think there was that interesting element that they could freely speak up to someone without being judged. And, and it's also true because we discussed it recently here at Harvard that, for instance, when it comes to surveys and various types of interviews, when AI is conducting those interviews or surveys, actually people share a bit more than they would with other people because they're not judged, because they feel listened to and maybe heard even to some extent, even if it's, as we spoke prior, a bit superficial because AI is sort of pretending to care about you. It has that whole, simulation that it drags you in where it's kind of your friend, cares about you, and can be very problematic. But the evidence is there. People feel judged by others. Sometimes they would be more inclined to share something with AI. And in that way, I would say that there is definitely an opportunity with, a professional AI support for real therapy. For instance, you can have a therapy with someone. Obviously, your therapist will not always be there for you, not 24/7. That's clear.
As an intermediary.
Yes, but as a certain proxy, something that interacts with you a bit more frequently, maybe collects some of your experiences during the day, helps you make sense of them, is there to just simply listen or just, to passively learn about what happened to you. I think if people are inclined to share a bit more, maybe that's a helpful material also for that therapist. So in that way, like you said, in various regulated environments, we absolutely can see benefits of that. And I work in the academia, as you do, James, and I think, we have here as well many interesting cases for a beneficial and positive use of AI. Think about AI tutors that are helping out in the process of studying. You have a lecture or class, seminar you attend with your professor, but then maybe you didn't hear something, or maybe you just, had a hard time raising your hand and saying, hey, I don't understand it. It happens. Some people are shy, and they wouldn't speak up when they feel confused or something. And, some sort of AI tutor that is helping them out in prepping for an exam with a professor. I even have an avatar of me that has all my slides and class materials. And when my students have an exam with me, I just tell them to practice with the avatar prior. I just tell them, listen, you can ask the avatar some questions, but you can also kind of simulate the examination itself because it can ask you questions and it looks like me. So it's a bit of a, a help, something that mitigates that stress maybe before the examination because you familiarize yourself with that setting. And it's not a perfect solution for sure, but it's an interesting solution. We also have recently done an interesting, I think, experiment. Our new experiment was on Socratic AI. So the type of AI that does not provide answers, but really asks you questions and how that would work in various educational settings. And I think it's very promising. So there are many areas where we can definitely see benefits of this technology as long as, like we spoke prior, there is a human in the loop. There is that real human to human connection. So there is that real therapist that you're also seeing. I would say that this makes most sense, I guess. And also, when we started rolling out this project with avatars at our institution back home in Poland, some students asked me if I would then be replaced. So as the professor, would I still teach them at all? Or am I just, using the avatar and they will never see me again? And I told them, no, absolutely, that's not the case. I want to have classes with you guys. I want to see you on site. I want us to just better use the time, maybe not direct transfer of knowledge from me to you, but rather a debate, a discussion. Some pieces of that knowledge can be transferred by an avatar. And I think that for all of us would be perhaps a more interesting experience. So I think we should look for such pathways that are interesting pathways of using this technology, but that means that they're always a bit limited, that there's some thought behind it, so kind of where does it work and where it's not so beneficial, that there is a sense of direction, because I don't feel that there is a sense of direction in AI deployment currently. In many different organizations, it's just about costs or just use AI as much as you can. Just let's be an AI native organization, AI native culture, and it means just more AI everywhere. And to me, it's probably not the best trajectory.
As an associate provost, one of my responsibilities was trying to work on student retention, trying to figure out what kinds of students were going to get in trouble or were having problems that needed some kind of intervention. And often those were social, psychological problems. But the intervention was through a human. The system would then detect, using 1,500 factors about a student, all kinds of things that you wouldn't imagine, that were determined to be indicative of students being in some kind of trouble. And it would then send a note to their student advisor, an academic advisor. But you could imagine, and there already are systems that do the same thing for mental health issues. And so it's, the application of AI in a therapy context isn't just the direct interaction with the patient. It's also utilizing the vast capabilities of intuition that these systems enable.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think, frankly speaking, I don't think, for instance, the academia has used AI extensively enough to personalize students' educational pathway. Like you said, like you can build a system that's going to track if there are problems, but you can also equally build a system that's going to help out in figuring out what are the best electives for you, taking into account your gifts, the classes you've taken. And, a lot of these choices are made blindly. In Europe, we have this very popular program called Erasmus, which is traveling to other European countries for a semester or a whole year, generously sponsored by the European Commission. Most students just pick a university randomly, or they go to a place that has a great weather. But there's very little, thinking behind, let's say, what is the best fit for what you've studied already. And I think an AI system can be a great help in that, because we often, as professors, we don't know all the 150 partners, universities and other institutions that our students can go to. I cannot meaningfully say which choice will be the best for you. But if you have a good system with a rich database that you simply interact with using natural language, you say, okay, I'd like good weather, but I'm also interested in that part of AI which university suits me best, and these are my scores. So realistically, am I going to get in or not? So I see plenty of spaces where that kind of support can be really great, and it can be very helpful and would enhance students' mobility, students' careers in the future, maybe career choices as well. So the things that we've never had maybe the time and resources to really work with. And also, well, our computational intelligence is slightly different than the one that AI has. And here, I think, with things that are working at scale, where you have multiple different, Excel sheets with different possibilities and choices, AI may be the best solution. And I would not shy away from that. I wouldn't say that we just shouldn't have AI at the academia. I know that many universities or colleges are trying to ban artificial intelligence, which I think is never effective, and it's not going to work too well.
Or force everyone to learn it, which is the other end. So.
Well, yes. I mean, I would say that I would appreciate a class that's intentionally about being in the classroom without any technological mediation, without AI. And I think that if there's a good reason for that, I would appreciate such classes. And I think all the students like versatile approaches. So they would appreciate a class where everything is on paper and it's like very well structured of why that is. But then also in many cases, they obviously want to use AI. And ultimately, I think it's also a lesson of responsibility. I, had a class some time ago, a couple of months ago, and I told my students that there will be a take-home exam. And this take-home exam was not really the core of the assessment. It was something extra. But I told them that if they want to use AI, it's all right. If they decide not to, that's also their choice. I had some expectations. I wanted them to use AI in a way where they would share their prompts with me and be a bit more reflexive about why and how they use particular AI tool, and maybe use more than one, etc. But I also told them that they have to remember that AI is this sort of big, I'm not sure if I should call it democratizer, but maybe equalizer, where if they all send me papers written with AI, they will just simply be equally good, and maybe none of them would stand out. And I have to tell, it was the first time, we had ChatGPT for more like 3 years, I guess 4 years maybe. It was the first time where humans actually sent me papers that they've written themselves. Just that was their decision, because they wanted to stand out, and they considered it a premium that they put that effort, and they knew their papers were imperfect, and AI is obviously great at formatting, etc. But that was just their conscious decision. And I think, yeah, such discussions should take place, and we should have many different approaches. But what I meant was like overall banning and then trying to escape, technology by shielding the whole organization from it. That I think is not going to work. But pluralism of different approaches, enriching meaningful discussions about AI, academia is the right place for it.
What is the automation migration interface?
Yeah, so that's actually, that's a project that we're currently embarking on. So we're now working on this sort of solution that is integrating 11 different European universities. And we are building an AI university, I think I should say. So we're trying to build together a set of tools that would enhance our teaching through AI. And we are 11 different schools from Europe. We're trying to do it together. And part of it is actually a solution that is developed by other team members, which is about as I mentioned prior, holistic mobility. So mobility outside your own country, going to different places and using AI to pick that place where you actually want to spend your Erasmus program, where you want to do a double degree or spend part of your study, but also then bind it together with future career opportunities. So we're trying to build, in fact, an AI advisor that would help you in picking the best place for you to spend your, say, Erasmus program or whatever international program, and then come back have your remittances from that stay, include that again in the chart, and then think about, what's your next best career move, taking into account how the European labor market looks like, right? So what's the mobility on that market? What are people paid for? What are the most important professions? Which professions seem to be growing and which professions seem to be on decline? So the system is real and active, and it's part of our bigger effort, as I said, of introducing AI to the educational system, not to teaching per se, but maybe to managing the academia or the university more so, and offering students, thanks to AI, better possibilities to place themselves mostly on the European market, not really beyond, but mostly on the European market. So we're trying to look at, databases of labor statistics, mobility and migration, but also that personal thing, which is students' records, what classes they've taken, who they are, if they are willing to take a Big Five test or any other personality test, which we can then account for in terms of how, what would be the most effective way for them to interact with AI. So there are many different parts of it, but the whole thing is supposed to support them traveling in Europe, then coming back and landing a good job.
From the 2012 paper that Frey and Osborne published about the macroeconomic effects or the employment effects of automation until about 2022, I was arguing to people that higher ed was the way to make yourself insulated from the coming automation, that routine cognitive and physical tasks were going to be the first things to go, and that the more creative you could be and the more a writer you could be, those kinds of things, those were going to be the last thing to be automated. Not that I didn't say they were never going to be automated, but it was going to be the last thing. And then it all flipped around. You've just done a meta-analysis of the employment effects of automation. What's your current assessment? Are white-collar workers doomed, as we suspect?
The problem is nobody really knows. So we actually, what we detected in that paper that you mentioned is that Europe is not doing enough to understand the problem, because we don't have enough databases. We don't have an observatory in Europe, even though we collect so much data about, say, employment. Somehow these databases are not giving us a full picture of what's happening on the European market because of automation.
And the OECD's intervention in that debate was, I think, very useful, which was that, look, jobs aren't just one thing. They're a combination of different skills. And if you take out one of the skills with automation, the rest of it can expand to fill the job. And if we don't have that kind of granular understanding, yeah.
Exactly. That's it. And I don't think we've done enough. And that's why we are in this perplexing, weird situation where, on the one hand, we can say something already. We can say something meaningful about, say, entry-level jobs and how they are more threatened by AI. And this is something you clearly see, particularly in the IT sector, where juniors are not needed. But then you obviously have this question: if I have no juniors, how will I have seniors that will then in the future supervise artificial intelligence? In the US, I guess you have a hiring freeze, but then this hiring freeze, if you ask a serious economist about the reasons for it, it cannot just be simply attributed to AI. Probably it's because of the tariffs, probably because of the geopolitical instability. And in Europe, we have a similar situation where we don't really have models that would tell us exactly what's happening, and we don't have enough data. We're actually, we're planning to propose to the Commission as a team of scholars to maybe try and build an observatory of that kind that would include data from all the EU members, because the countries also have their own different statistics focused on the job market, purchasing power, etc. Some of these statistics are not that good, and they would benefit from, let's say, an enhancement probably, but they would all help us to understand what policies could work in the future, right? What policies make most sense. Bear in mind that Europe has just regulated AI because of its values, because of the value of privacy, etc. But this was more like, I would say, top down, a certain normative stance. It was not backed by data that you have to regulate AI in this particular area because it's threatening to our economies. That was never the case. It was more so and normative scaffolding, and then policies were a follow-up to that normative scaffolding. And I think we should and can invert it. We certainly need much more data. And all of us would benefit from that, frankly speaking. In the US, I would assume similarly, because we don't know who really is threatened. In China, you have that big scale automation and robotics, and probably their ideas about, what should be protected, which jobs are, somehow threatened by AI is very different from what we have here. But on the other hand, what I'm seeing in the US is also a big rise of robotics and embodied AI. Recently, I guess, Melania Trump has, spoken about the future of education with a robot by her side, which to me was kind of interesting because it feels like, certain things as hype go away in AI. So last year it was general artificial intelligence, super intelligence. Now I don't see these words, or I don't hear them that often, but now robotics is that big thing. So because of those shifts, it's just kind of hard to make sense of, who's really threatened, what's threatened. If you take Anthropic's report, yes, they have a report that is mostly based on the use of Claude, and what they say, yes, some of the jobs that people have been doing are already covered by artificial intelligence to a large extent. So in IT, it's like 70% or like 60%. So it's very substantial, right? In some other areas, creative areas, is more like 30%, 40% of the job is being covered. So the remaining 60 is still on the human side. What do we do about it? Do we focus on that 60 or 40 that is ours, right? And like just continue with AI being better at what it's been doing in that 40% coverage or whatever it is? Or do we try to recalibrate it completely? There was a fairly, I think, wild idea. I give you that example. I think it's anecdotal, but it's interesting. The Polish Minister for Labor considered introducing a bill that would protect some essential work from AI completely. So, there would be a list of professions where AI cannot step in at all. They have to be performed by humans. And then it was criticized. But I think it just shows you that we're out there with many question marks, not many answers, and people are just trying different options or like policy that could potentially work in a world where there is I would say a certain vacuum of information and a lot of fear as well. So I frankly speaking, I don't know. My intuition is that some sectors will be hit very, very hard by artificial intelligence, IT being the most prominent one, but not the only one for sure. There will be also many others that will be transformed by AI, which will pose so many different new questions about, as I said, accountability or who's responsible for work. How did the division of labor between humans and AI look at those professions? What did I do? What did AI do? Do we have tools to measure that? Not really. So I think these are all very important questions, and like just going forward with, I don't know, this techno-libertarian agenda that we simply need more AI for the sake of AI or competing with others without being mindful of the effects on the job market in the US or elsewhere is, to me, not a good idea.
Well, I'm a huge Europhile and a supporter of a social democratic approach here. And I'm constantly contrasting China's authoritarian surveillance state and state-owned enterprises, and the PLA does half of the AI development, versus the United States, which has this insane techno-accelerationist, techno-libertarian approach, as you said, which is now generating its left-wing Luddite backlash. And I'm saying, I point people to the AI Act and the DSA and the DMA in Europe and say, look, this is the direction that we should be headed, where you assess the risks and you have strong privacy protections and so forth. And you have an observatory that actually has to do audits of algorithmic bias and so forth. I recognize that it's problematic when you get up close and see how the sausage is made. And I understand now that there's a huge pushback in Europe, which could have been predicted, which is that firms that want to do, like Mistral and others that want to do innovation in the European space are saying, hey, we can't afford all these regulations, this regulatory burden that you put on us. If you want a European industry, you have to loosen it up. So where are you on that debate right now?
Yeah, Well, I had my moments of frustration for sure, particularly when I saw the first version of the AI Act, which was 1,000 pages. And 1,000 pages realistically is not something that a small or medium-sized entrepreneur could read, and they would certainly not afford a lawyer that could help them interpret it and then tell them what exactly are they supposed to do in that context if they're using any AI tools. So I had that moment of really deep frustration. But I think what Europe is doing right now is it's trying to simplify those regulations so that they're actually more executable. You also don't want a dead law. And some laws that the European Union has put together are dead laws today because they're just way too complicated.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, but then on the other hand, the fact that they're insisting on the protection of consumer data, I think is a good direction, that they're looking into protection of minors, and that they're also trying to understand better the impact of AI on the job market. I would say that Europe is a bit more shielded because of the regulation that it has, because of the fact that the pace of automation is not so fast. We have a bit of time to make better decisions about, which AI tools would actually help at workplaces and which would be threatening. So in that way, the fact that we're a bit slower may not be such a negative thing. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but I just feel it's paradoxical because obviously we're all very eager to understand the power of AI better and to test new tools, and it's all true. But then on the other hand, when you look at those larger effects, particularly on the job market, maybe you want to be slightly slower. And by the way, I have to tell you that recently at Harvard, I was part of a debate with Chinese scholars, actually, who said that they were obviously promoting the Chinese approach to AI. It's the year of the horse, initiation of that year. They launched a couple of different discussions and debates. And it was very interesting to me because those scholars, mostly lawyers, said that China is now taking an approach that is slightly more similar to the European approach. So they're trying to regulate artificial intelligence. They're trying to regulate, for instance, their relationship between minors and AI. They're very strict about it, as they
just
usually
adopted laws on social robot companionship and regulating.
Yeah. And they also said that they are going in two different directions. One is that more universal set of regulations on AI, and the other one is actually regionalized or focused on very specific groups, including age groups or professional groups. So they said that if they were to compare themselves to someone, they would compare themselves to Europe much more than to the US, where you have more so this no guardrail, right, approach and being super fast, which, by the way, is quite funny because it's always propelled by this notion or thought that China is right behind us and we have to race China so we can't regulate
anything. They're slowing down
anything.
faster than we are.
Yes, and then China, on the other hand, is trying to regulate. But I also noticed, because I asked them specifically, those scholars and the whole group that came, the delegation from China, whether there is a fear of automation in China, and apparently there's not that much of it because
demographically they need to find replacement for the disappearing labor, right? So.
Yes, that's one thing, but the other is also that what the state communicates is actually that AI is obviously a tool, like you said, of surveillance and social control, social stability, they call it, right? But on the other hand, it's also a tool for a welfare for everybody. So it's going to bring more money to all of us. Do you hear that in the US, that AI is something that's going to give money to all of us, or support our well-being and our life?
Elon promised us universal high income, so that
Yes, well, that's beautiful, and thank you, Elon, for this beautiful promise. But I'm just I'm unsure because many things that Elon said are very speculative. So no, I would just say that what you hear in the US a lot from big tech is actually, well, AI is threatening your job. The organization will be better, and those who are, the CEOs and executives will be happy with it, but the rest of you, well, we don't really care. Whereas in China, if I understand correctly, the notion is slightly different. So we will all benefit from AI. China, I would say, also has different shock absorbers, right? It has high household savings. It has that active state that we just spoke about, and still big resources of cheap labor. So it's the circumstance is different, and still the technology is narratively addressed. As a European, obviously, I prefer probably that European narrative around AI, and maybe careful approach to regulating this technology, but still not deciding not to pursue, say, innovations. But I think the US approach is now particularly problematic, I would say, because it's the one where you hear no benefits for real humans out there, but you are supposed to some extent, even cover the costs of this technological acceleration through, energy bills and data centers. So people are already contributing to it, but what's the end game of it and what's the goal for them? What's in it for them, I think, is the part that remains unanswered. And that, to me, is very problematic.
It's actually my impression that there's more support for universal basic income in the West as a response to technological change than there is in China, which has a strong kind of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, Confucian focus. The social welfare state has never been a principal focus of the Communist Party in China. But universal basic income is much more talked about now than it has been in the past. And people know the history. We almost got one in the United States in 1972 under Richard Nixon, a negative income tax. So there have been previous periods where the idea was popular. And I have supported it ever since I learned about it in the 80s, even before there was any evidence of technological unemployment. You've written a whole book about the pros and cons. Where have you landed right today?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a fascinating topic. Interestingly enough, I think it can be even dissected from the whole technological component. So you can try and pursue UBI regardless of where technology stands. And if I remember correctly, because I've written this book with Robert Wright already a couple of years ago, we tracked it back to many centuries ago. So these ideas are definitely not new. The idea of introducing some form of UBI has been out there, a couple of centuries ago. And certainly it was not because of automation or even industrialization. It was just the right thing to do, right? By the thinkers who were pursuing that concept that we should just simply divide wealth amongst ourselves and everyone would ultimately be better off thanks to that. So, clearly there is a link also because if there is technological unemployment that is stable or just, temporary, this could be considered a solution to it. And you're right that particularly, I think, in the Silicon Valley, you hear a lot about the universal basic income, but I'm just not afraid. I'm just afraid that it's not the type of universal basic income that we mean when we talk about it. More so some form of technological dividend, some form of extra that you couldn't really rely on to sustain your livelihood. I remember Sam Altman mentioned $3,000 per household, thanks to artificial intelligence, that, by the way, weirdly enough, would be paid by OpenAI. So they would be an operator of UBI. How weird, a private company. But a couple of years, he was like promising that. And I thought to myself, oh, it's a nice add-on to your life, but it's certainly not something that can sustain a family, $3,000, So if it's an extra, yes. But what I'm worried about is that this term of UBI is very often used in the Silicon Valley as something that is supposed to just simply shut the mouth of everyone who's talking about technological unemployment. They're just saying, oh, there's a way. It's just universal basic income. Don't you worry about it. Things will be fine.
At the same time that they campaign vigorously against billionaire taxes to pay for it.
Exactly. And I think this speaks really like volumes to me that this is not an honest conversation about this solution. UBI, it's just like a word that's being used to stop the discussion effectively. So that is something I dislike. And, there are many ways of introducing UBI. And I think we spoke not only about UBI per se, but we also spoke about universal basic asset or universal basic services that to some extent do exist in many countries. Like in Scandinavian countries, you have a lot of universal basic services. And by the way, Europe partially has adopted that approach too. So there are many ways of introducing something universally to people that could be helpful to them.
A social wage. It doesn't have to be $1 in your pocket. Yeah,
absolutely. So there are many ways around it. And I remember, because my colleague, who is an economist with whom I wrote the book, I don't think he's particularly left-leaning, but he told me that it's interesting about the UBI, that it's actually a policy that is considered interesting both by, say, progressives and even libertarians, right?
That's
because
right.
It's in a way simplifying certain ways of supporting the citizens. So no, I think if there was a real serious discussion about it, I'd enjoy that a lot and I would welcome it. It's just that what I hear from the Silicon Valley makes me more suspicious than happy, because I think they're utilizing this word and it will stop meaning anything very soon. Because if it's another hype, like, I don't know, general artificial intelligence was a hype at some point and now robots are a hype. If UBI is just another hype, I think we won't get anything out of it. But if the state would really address it in any meaningful way, then absolutely I would welcome it. I think and yeah, definitely there's a lot to share. There's a lot of technological dividend out there that we haven't seen in our pockets quite yet. So yeah, I would welcome that.
In the popular science fiction series, The Expanse, they projected that on Earth most people would be on basic. And some of the people on basic can't even afford a home, so they're just homeless, but they have enough to, get food through their basic. Yeah. So I think we're already beginning to anticipate that the real fight is between low basic and high basic. It's like
yeah. No, absolutely. I fully agree with you, and I think it's the correct intuition. I remember that also Elon promised recently something. He spoke about jobless future, where you will choose to perform a job, but you won't have to do it. And this to me is like, okay, if somebody says something like that and just leaves it there, just more questions than answers, right? What does that mean, that you'll be able to choose whether you work or not? So where is that, economic part in this whole equation? Are you being supported by UBI? And, thanks to that, you will choose to pursue certain things that interest, not really as a job. So the concept of job is gone. It's interesting, to dwell into that, to think about it, but you need that solid foundation first before we embark on thinking about, what's a true job, what's the meaning of work, and, what does it mean to pursue your interests? Because I feel that they're inverting this whole discussion. So they're talking about the nice and pleasant parts of it and some sort of very vague future of luxury automation, but nobody tells us how to get there, really. So I think your intuition here is really correct.
Yeah. We've been speaking with Aleksandra Przegalińska. She's Vice Rector of Kozminski University in Poland, and also currently a fellow at Harvard and working on labor, as you've heard, and many other fascinating topics. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, James. It's been a pleasure.
The Technoprogressive Hub is sponsored by the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies and hosted by me, Jay Hughes. Find us at Substack at Technoprogressives.